Welcome. My name is Martha Revel. I am a recent master's graduate in experimental archaeology and material culture at University College Dublin School of Archaeology. This presentation will detail the motivations for and results of my master's dissertation conducted during the summer of 2020, titled Bears, Boar, People and Points, an experimental investigation into the production of Irish late Mesolithic bone points and its implications for wider research. This project set out to advertise and consolidate the previous research on and experimentally test the proposed production sequence for Ireland's largest and only studied Mesolithic bone point assemblage from the cuts on the lower Bann River. Ossus tools, which are made from hard animal materials such as bone or antler, are exceptional, being both organic and mineral in nature, meaning that although not routinely preserved in Ireland's acidic soil, they stand a higher chance of survival than other purely organic materials. Applicable to a wide variety of applications, conducting research into these more resilient organic materials is vital in building a fuller picture of prehistoric life and challenging the view that stone technologies dominated material culture. The Cuts assemblage provides a starting point for further ossus research in Ireland, creating a foundation from which to further explore non-food-based animal exploitation, as well as other technologies and resources associated with bone point production missing from the archaeological record. Containing some 90 intact bone points, the Cuts collection is dated to the late Mesolithic. The assemblage was discovered during an extensive programme of drainage works on the River Bann during the 1930s. Initial research onto the collection was started in earnest by Peter Woodman and first mentioned in his 2015 publication, in which he discusses the value of the collection, suggesting the points were used as fishing implements, and details 6 other sparse collections across Ireland, with a total of 11 confirmed Mesolithic dates. This publication was followed by a collaborative paper between Peter Woodman, Eva David, Sinead McCartan, and Frederick Mullen, also in 2015. This paper compares 2 collections, the Cuts and part of a much larger bone point assemblage from Batala in eastern Sweden. It is here that the first preliminary overview of the Cuts assemblage is laid out, including confirmation of 15 typological forms and 5 radiocarbon dates, and suggestion that the bones were either human, wild boar, or brown bear, but without confirmed species identification. Although straightforward production sequences were put forward in this paper based on the author's prior experimental practice with other collections, neither the Cuts nor the Batala collection were tested. Unfortunately, the planned research conducted in this paper was not completed nor published, due to the passing of Peter Woodman in 2016. My work set out to attract research attention to the collection once again, by testing the feasibility of the production sequence specifically for this collection and for the faunal resources available in an Irish context. Faunal availability in the Irish Mesolithic differs from the majority of Europe. Why this is, and why it may affect the application of existing research into bone point production, needs to be addressed. Firstly, Mesolithic Ireland has numerous differing trends to the vast majority of Europe during the same period. This had been explained by the fact that it was sea-locked far earlier than its neighbours. The lack of a land bridge not only hindered human colonisation, but faunal mobility, meaning the common mammalian fauna we have come to recognise as Europe's staple game, such as red deer, are missing entirely, leaving quite different species for hunters to rely on. Indeed, some believe that it is the lack of these species themselves, so important to mainland Europe, that deterred the colonisation of Ireland, not the water crossing itself. Secondly, the application of experimental methodologies to ossus studies provides a great tool through which to study production and function. Indeed, doing so has created a bank of solidly tested methods of preparing, working, and using ossus tools. However, many of these prior experiments have been conducted quite reasonably with the more common Mesolithic fauna, which cannot be readily transferred to an Irish context. In cases such as the cuts, it is important that we do not just presume the production sequence for one set of fauna are applicable to another. To address this, 4 stages of experimentation were conducted to explore the proposed production sequence published in 2015. Each stage isolated one step of the overall production process to understand its viability and explored differing equifinality for a finished bone point. The method and experiment design for this project was a simple one, by breaking down the proposed production sequence into Stage 1, the regulation of the bone surface through grinding; Stage 2, the removal of distal ends; Stage 3, the splitting of the bone to create blanks; and Stage 4, the grinding of blanks to form finished artifacts. Each stage was the foundation for individual experiments, comparing different methods or tools with which to achieve the desired action or result. These were informed by details in the production sequence where present, or by common practices repeatedly seen in other publications. By keeping each stage of the production sequence separate, it was possible to see which techniques would allow onward progression and which would not. It was hoped that by isolating each stage, the macroware created by each process could be compared to the original collection to further corroborate the results. The preparation and experimentation phases of this project were conducted during Ireland's tightest restrictions to manage the outbreak of COVID-19, which had a significant impact on access, resources and conditions. Specifically, access to the original assemblage was limited to one preliminary visit, preventing comparison or detailed photo collection. The quantity and indeed desired species of raw material was significantly limited, meaning I could not use fresh cut pieces for each experiment. Experiments had to be conducted in a shared domestic setting, meaning recording, lighting and space were all areas of contention. The recording methods employed were images, weights and measurements. These created a clear visual catalogue showing the effects of different techniques, more experiential observations, and where needed, material loss over time. Due to the obvious ethical issues, using brown bear and human bone was not acceptable. It was decided that using domestic pig bones as a proxy for wild boar would be the most accessible option. Bones were collected from my local butcher, but due to lockdown I was limited to this one source and quickly had to resort to using cattle bones as well, to mitigate the resource shortages. Although inappropriate for the Irish context, cow bones enabled me to represent, at least in part, brown bear bones in terms of size and provided an unexpected opportunity to reflect on the likely size of raw material required to produce the range of points seen in the collection. Thankfully, my bone stock was further supplemented by occasional deliveries of broken and decaying bone material sourced from previous university research projects and a variety of grinding and percussion stones by a kind lecturer. The results of Stage 1 experiments looked at the regulation of the bone surface through grinding, with and without the distal ends removed. Results indicate that this initial stage of surface preparation with either method was counterproductive, because the natural profile of bones prevented targeted grinding, causing material to be removed from the wrong places. Further, the irregular thickness of bones meant high points, which were removed, risked reducing the thickness of the bone profile, weakening the usable material. I suggest that by looking to other technologies, we may find a more effective means of creating straighter, even blanks. In lithics, for example, the thinning process removes material from the underside of a high point rather than the ridge itself, lifting the edge. If this were applied to bone working, perhaps the splitting process to make blanks might provide the right opportunity to select the choice stretches of bone. Stage 2 experiments tested 3 possible methods for removing the distal ends of the bones, informed by an experimental paper given by Eva David in 2006. The results suggest that the second experiment was the most viable, producing cleaner, more controlled results with less exertion. This experiment employed prior grooving to weaken the bone and direct blunt force to break it. Comparably, experiment 1, which used blunt force alone, caused the bone to crack, removing control from the equation, while experiment 3, which also employed grooving, but used a bone wedge to try and break the weakened end, also failed, with the bone wedge having no effect other than to splinter itself under repeated stress. The third stage of experiments looked at methods for splitting the bones into blanks. This stage had the most direction in the original text, suggesting the use of wedge and splinter techniques, with or without prior grooving, and the use of an anvil surface. Both methods successfully produce blanks, but with varying qualities of usable material and predictability. The blanks which were produced through prior grooving were prone to fracturing off before the end of the groove template, resulting in quite fine, narrow fragments. On the other hand, no prior grooving allowed the bone to take its preferred course, creating wider, stronger, regular blanks, which still did not run the full length of the bone, creating an almost wedge-like blank, thick at one end but thinning at the other. Of all the experiments, this one was by far the most impacted by lack of skill and warrants further exploration. The final stage of experimentation looked at the grinding process, specifically the mobility of the craft, whether it could be done using handheld tools or needed to be a stationary activity, endeavouring to expand the toolkit already in use and add depth to the production sequence. Experiments used pre-cut cattle bone blanks, ground for an hour using either a static grinding block or a handheld coarse pebble. Water was used to help lubricate the grinding surface based on experience with other grinding technologies. The result of this experiment clearly shows that grinding using a static surface is far more efficient, with the blanks recognizable as early copies of bone points, compared to the blanks ground with a handheld grinding stone showing very little alteration and proving very unergonomic in practice. Despite the challenges imposed by the COVID-19 lockdown, the result of this project was a confirmation that most aspects of the original production sequence can be applied to an Irish context, whilst removing or reordering some stages to create a very preliminary but clear model from which to build on in future research. Further, it has highlighted, through experiential consideration, the practical working of the material and related toolkit, which reflects the choices and multi-directional approaches viable to produce similar finished products. Finally, the experiments have shed light on further questions relating to source material and the appropriate use of domestic animals as proxies of wild fauna, important for all experimentation, but of specific note where limited faunal availability creates the need for a specific source material. Due to the limitations of COVID-19 and my limited skills as a novice, I believe there is plenty of scope to consolidate on this research before further development on the current production sequence and the host of other research topics for the cuts can be approached. To begin with, I would like to repeat the experiments already conducted, increasing repeatability 10 times or more for each test, to provide a larger data set, while employing more empirical recording tactics. Within these, I would like to extend the variety of methods, tools, and resources considered, building on the observations made here and drawing up more upon materials seen in the archaeological record. Finally, I would like to connect with and learn from discussions with craft practitioners and other academic specialists to make sure this research contributes to the wider body of OSSUS research. Despite the challenges faced in this project, it has proved the need for increased research into ossus and related organic material culture in Ireland, as well as the value in researching organic material from what are considered less richly preserved contexts, or those that don't fit the status quo. Thank you for taking the time to tune in today. I hope you found this presentation engaging. If you have any comments or questions, I look forward to speaking to you over on Discord or via email.